Howdy folks, it's the Tall Turtle here, and today we're going to talk about a very challenging and tricky subject, and that is X-Plane versus Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Yep, I wasn't going to do this, but I'm like, you know what? I do have some input to offer, so why not? However, it's going to be turtle style, so this video is not going to have any fancy music, no fancy cuts. I'll do what I can with the graphics, but it's not going to be fancy graphics. I'm going to talk relatively calmly, but not quite monotone, but hopefully the content is what you're here for, and this does some good. I know a lot of people are doing this, but every person has something different to offer. So take what I have to say and what others have to say and make a list of what applies to you specifically and how you're going to use the sim, and decide for yourself. So the first thing, the biggest thing that probably matters most to most people is the cost. X-Plane, out of the box, download it, get your CDs, whatever. At the time of this recording, I believe it is $59. That is $59 US. And you get the simulator, you get a couple airplanes included. I can't remember the exact number, I apologize. X-Plane version right now is 11.50, which is big because it uses Vulkan. And that's it. You just get the simulator for 59 bucks. Now, that being said, if you are the target market for X-Plane and you want to take it as a serious simulator, you will not be happy with the base simulator. You will right away be spending money on add-ons. And there are free add-ons too, but we'll get into the add-on thing. But you'll be wanting to spend money. And coming from somebody who said I was never going to spend money on add-ons, well, even I spent money on add-ons almost right away. So your cost will be more than $59. Microsoft Flight Simulator though, right now the cost, I think if you have a Game Pass it's included. I don't do the Game Pass, so I'm not sure, but I think it's included in the Game Pass. Or you can get the deluxe, or I got the premium because this is my hobby. So I spent $119 for premium, which is almost double the cost. Well, it is double the cost of X-Plane out of the box. However, I plan on going a very, very long time without spending an additional penny on Microsoft Flight Simulator. So for me, that $119 is pretty much going to be my cost for the hobby, for the sim, where I spent, $400 on X-Plane. So for me, personally, I think Microsoft Flight Simulator, even if you get the premium, will cost you less than X-Plane. But that's what my thought is. That might not be your experience. People will still spend thousands of dollars on add-ons for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Trust me, they will. But you don't have to, and you won't probably be happy without it. So cost, for me, that goes to Microsoft, to be honest. So we'll see. That's 1 point for Microsoft, who's keeping score. I wasn't going to, and I just did. Anyway, so for cost, I think Microsoft Flight Simulator will cost less over time as a hobby, even if you spring for premium out of the box. But we'll see. Your mileage will vary. Next we have add-ons and mods, because anybody who is into simulators, whether there's FSX, P3D, or X-Plane, they spend more time researching, purchasing, and learning how to use and install mods than they do in the simulator. I think it's funny. However, with Microsoft Flight Simulator, that kind of changes. But let's start with X-Plane so we keep a consistent thing here. Add-ons drive up your actual cost of the sim, right? So X-Plane is an amazing base simulator. I mean, of course you don't have to spend money on it, but you're not going to be very happy very long. It's a base simulator. There are default aircraft, but only the default Cessna is good. The rest of them are just not that great. They're getting better, but they're not that good. Now there are mods for those airplanes. So there's the Zebo 737, and it is free, but you're going to spend a lot of time learning how to install it if you don't already know how to do it. You don't just dump it in a folder. Kind of, but not really. The cost and quality of the add-on planes for X-Plane can get very expensive. I spent like $70 some 2 or 3 times on FlyJ Sim products with each version that updates. It's worth it, but it's not cheap. That costs more than the simulator, right? And that's just for one set of planes. Other planes, cheap ones, 34 bucks probably per plane. 39 per plane, and they're not even study quality. So that'll drive up your cost. Is aircraft, right? Buying more aircraft that actually work well. Weather, you have several options for weather for X-Plane, for example. You've got SkyMax Pro, which I use, $40 right there. Add that to your cost. Scenery add-ons for X-Plane. You're going to want to get into scenery. I bought airports for places that were nostalgic for me. Again, only own a few, but at $10 to $40 a pop, that adds up your cost. Some free stuff like the version 4 mesh, you're going to want to learn to get that mesh in there, or you can use Ortho 4XP, which is satellite imagery. However, you need terabytes of storage for that, and you need to spend a lot of time learning how to use it, and it's going to crash your sim the first couple times because you won't do it right, and so on and so on. These are things you would most likely do to X-Plane, even if you're only a casual serious user. Traffic. There's add-ons for traffic. I don't use them, but you can get that for X-Plane. Drives up your cost. Resources for flight planning. Free, but you have to learn how to use SkyVector and all these other websites that I can't think of right now because they have them bookmarked. But you need to learn how to flight plan outside of X-Plane. Yeah, X-Plane will give you radar frequencies and stuff if you're within like 30 miles of an airport, but you can't plan a flight that way. Sure, the GPS and the Garmin's will do approaches and things, but you still got to know which one you want and stuff like that. So you will want a flight planning resource. Navigraph. You're going to want to update your nav data for X-Plane. You need to pay for that. I think, I shouldn't even say cost, but I'm going to. I think I pay, I don't know what, is it $31 a year just for nav data for Navgraph? I can't remember. I have an auto renew, whatever it is, updates like every September for me, and whatever. It's not that expensive, but if you want your nav data current in the sim, you're going to have to pay for that in X-Plane. You don't have to do it, but if you flight plan, I've run into it many times where I'll plan a flight and none of my stuff will be in the sim because it's too outdated. So I finally got a Navgraph subscription for flight sim for X-Plane. There's a bunch of other mods I can't think of that I don't use. Again, I said I run mine very lean, but all those things I mentioned, some are free, some cost money, are going to drive up your X-Plane overall cost. So you can see how my $400 I put into X-Plane is way cheap. I got off easy, or I'm getting off easy. Microsoft Flight Simulator, however, my experience so far is you can have a full experience out of the box. Completely full experience. You don't have to learn how to do mods. You can if you want to. You don't have to. You don't have to spend money on them. You can if you want to, but I have had a full experience. The default visuals are amazing. The default weather is amazing. The default aircraft aren't study level, but they're usable and pretty darn good. So I don't feel like, me as a casual serious, more on the serious side, even as a serious sim user, I'm fine with the default stuff in Simulator, Microsoft Flight Simulator for now anyway. I'm curious to see what's going to come out and available in the months and years to come. But right now, my $120, that's all I really plan on spending on the sim, unless I have some funny money to splurge with. Funny money? Disposable income to splurge with? Whereas X-Plane, I bought that. I needed to tweak it immediately. I just had to. So as far as add-ons and mods, add-ons for X-Plane right now are way better. So it gets a point there. However, it's going to drive up your costs like crazy. Even if it's free, it's going to drive up costs in terms of the labor you put into it. So who gets the point for that? I think they both get a point depending how you're looking at add-ons. Learning curve. So X-Plane as a simulator, the learning curve isn't that steep anymore. It used to be horrible. You used to have to Google everything to figure it out. But X-Plane 11.5, piece of cake. It isn't that big of a deal. If you want to get into data output and stuff, it can get complicated. And it can get kind of complicated if you want to bind commands to your yoke and stuff. You would have to probably Google them because of the way they're written out. So that can get tricky. And that's what makes it kind of a steepish learning curve. But it's not that big of a deal anymore. It's way easier than it used to be. However, if you're going to get into using resources for flight planning and get into some mods, that can get steep. Ortho 4XP, for example, that's a very steep learning curve. Tweaking your SkyMax Pro settings so you don't slaughter your frame rates, there's a slight learning curve to that, for example. How do you plan a flight using SkyVector and all these things? That has a learning curve. So the overall learning curve of X-Plane is much steeper than Microsoft Flight Simulator, but it's not as bad as it used to be. Microsoft Flight Simulator Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 isn't really a learning curve at all to use the sim. I'm not talking about flying airplanes. I'm talking about using the sim. Microsoft, it's set up like, Forza 7. It has typical Microsoft type menus, even though they didn't write it. They're the overseeing entity, and those are my elephants upstairs running around, sorry. So it has a Microsoft flavor, right? If you've done any Xbox gaming, it's going to be familiar to you. Again, not that there's like no learning curve any more than any other game from Xbox or Microsoft. If you do want to get into add-ons, just dump it in a community folder. That's it. That's all. Just dump it in a community folder. That's all you got to do. So not really a learning curve that is any more than in learning any other game. And we'll get to the game thing later, but not a big deal. Flying aircraft is different, but that's like learning to play a game is different. But the overall learning the sim, not a big deal for Microsoft. Default aircraft. So the default aircraft in X-Plane, the Cessna is pretty amazing. But other than that, the rest of them, they're enough to get you started. But once you spend any amount of time in the sim, you'll definitely be wanting some add-on or payware aircraft. Well, probably payware, and probably pay quite a bit of money for them. So the default planes are quite unsatisfactory, especially for the demographic that would choose X-Plane. So keep that in mind. You'll be putting cost in airplanes. As far as Microsoft Flight Simulator, the default are okay. Some are better than others, but for 99% of the people who are going to use that sim, it's going to be just fine. In fact, it's just fine for me for now for a rather serious simmer, but I do a lot of GA stuff anyway, so therefore it does what I need it to do. So, will I buy aircraft from Flight Sim Microsoft? Maybe, maybe not. But out of the box, it's okay for most people. It's even okay for me as someone who spends most of my time in GA stuff anyway. Now, the subject of a simulator versus a game. X-Plane is purely a simulator and definitely a hobby that you'll want to spend some time and money on over the course of your flight simulation hobby. If you treat X-Plane like a game, you're not going to enjoy it very much. Yeah, you can do goofy things in it, but if you're just going to like get in a plane, fly around, and land anywhere you want, there's not enough to it in terms of looking around and crashing somewhere. So as far as the game, X-Plane is definitely a simulator, 100%. There's just no way about it. Microsoft Flight Simulator, however, ranges from game to simulator, and you can change that. So you can spend all your time chasing after achievements and challenges and set everything to easy and have all the assists do things for you and fly over your house and fly over your friend's house, and it'll look amazing and do whatever you want and treat it like a game. That's fine. It works that way. Or you can change all your settings to hard, which is simulation basically, and plan your flights and treat it very seriously as a simulator, and it'll work just fine for that too. So Microsoft Flight Simulator is a range from Xbox game to PC simulation and anything in between. However, if you're purely into IFR and flight planning, Microsoft Flight Simulator does leave a lot to be desired. So this point as far as simulation versus game, purely simulator, it would go to X-Plane. If you want to treat it like a game or be more casual, it goes to Microsoft Flight Simulator. If you want to use it as a simulator but GA, I would say it goes to Microsoft. If you want to use it as a simulator but do IFR stuff, that definitely goes to X-Plane. So this one's a toss-up, depending on how you're going to use the sim. And this is the biggest thing of all, even though I probably talked about it the least, but it's huge. That should be on top of everyone's priority list, right up there with cost, simulation versus game. I think it's a toss-up depending on how you're going to use the sim. All right, VFR and general aviation, which is where your graphics and visuals come in. X-Plane visuals are okay, especially if you get into higher mesh and ortho XP, which are both free add-ons. If you're going to buy scenery and stuff, like the Orbix stuff, yeah, X-Plane can be pretty good for visual and graphics. It used to be what I would think would be the best until Microsoft Flight Simulator came out. And X-Plane visuals are okay. The weather looks good. The airplanes look really good, both default and add-on. But Microsoft Flight Simulator, once again, people's attention is what the visuals look like. So if you're going to do general aviation, and GA flights, Microsoft Flight Simulator. That's why people are getting the sim. That's why I got the sim, because I spend most of my time in general aviation. So that's why I got the sim, because it looks absolutely insane. It is photorealistic because it is photos of the ground superimposed over your terrain. It's as good as it can really get, especially if you have an airplane, if you have a PC that will run everything at highest graphics. However, the airplanes, both default and add-on for Microsoft Flight Simulator, the airplanes themselves don't look as good. They have a cartoonish flavor to them, whereas X-Plane, the airplanes inside and out are as photoreal as you can get. So that's interesting, I think. The world visuals, Microsoft Flight Simulator, hands down, that's the whole point. The airplanes, though, when you're sitting in the cockpit, the X-Plane airplanes look way better. But for VFR and general aviation, Microsoft Flight Simulator, hands down, not even a contest. IFR flying and flight planning, and this is where the technology in FMS, which is your flight management system, comes in. X-Plane is great and accurate once you collect your flight info and your planning from outside resources like SkyVector and such. The FMS and all the aircraft, the FMC, default and add-on, there's an add-on for FMC, is good, reliable, it'll do what you want it to do, it's easy to use, and is basically like real life. Microsoft Flight Simulator, though, has some flight planning, but it's super basic, leaves a lot to be desired. The GPS and FMS systems are kind of flaky. The autopilot gives up a little bit sometimes, it'll do whatever it wants. So as far as IFR stuff, if you're going to do flight planning and IFR flights, that type of thing, X-Plane, 100%, no contest. Visuals at cruise, I'm talking about 10,000, 12,000 feet or higher. This one surprised me a little bit the more time I spent in the Microsoft Sim. So X-Plane, the higher you get, the better it looks. And if you're going to do your IFR flights above 10,000 feet, X-Plane looks just fine, especially if you have your version 4 mesh. It looks fantastic, looks great. Microsoft Flight Simulator, the higher you get, it starts to look kind of silly, because the images that are on the ground, the satellite imagery, looks too good when you're really high, and therefore it looks like it's just photoshopped buildings on your ground, which it kind of is, right? I mean, it's the satellite imagery. So when you're really high and everything is maxed out, it looks off a little bit. And I noticed that during the Tour Japan flight. I was looking down at 10,000 feet. I'm like, those buildings, no, they wouldn't look like that. They're too clear, they're too crisp from that high up. Now the rivers and shorelines look outstanding at any level of Microsoft Flight Sim, and better than X-Plane at any level. But the overall scenery when you're cruising doesn't look that great to me. It looked too silly, like too good that high. So again, that goes back to the IFR, VFR. If you're going to do VFR, you're not going to really be 10,000 feet usually. So again, Microsoft Flight Simulator, visuals are amazing. But if your cruise is going to be above 10,000 feet or so because you're doing IFR, then yeah, X-Plane wins that too. So again, how are you going to use the sim? Are you going to use it for IFR? You can use it for VFR. Big difference. Opposite ends of the spectrum there. Weather. Default weather in X-Plane will use live weather, but it's okay. The clouds look pretty awful, but they look like something that represents clouds. So you'll probably want a weather add-on right out of the gate. That's why I got SkyMax Pro. The clouds look amazing and believable. The storm clouds look amazing and believable. It has weather and snow and all that stuff. I mean, rain and snow. The wind in X-Plane is a little strong. If you have a small aircraft, anything above a few knots is like a hurricane in X-Plane. Microsoft Flight Simulator, though, nothing is needed out of the box for weather. It has live weather. It looks like you're looking. I mean, if you see these people with their screenshots of storms and weather in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you cannot tell it's a photo or a simulator. It is realistic as you're possibly going to get, at least in this year, 2020. So you don't need to spend money on anything weather for Microsoft Flight Simulator. It has crosswind stuff. It seems to be more realistic than X-Plane in terms of my GA flying anyway. It doesn't feel like a hurricane when it's a 3-knot wind in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You can customize weather in both of them, but Microsoft Flight Simulator for weather, no, yeah, for sure. It's out of the box, don't need to spend a single penny, and it's better than the payware stuff for X-Plane, at least in the way I use it. See, that's the thing, the way I use it, the stuff out of the box, in terms of weather for Microsoft, is better than the stuff I paid for X-Plane, both in how it looks and how you can use it. Live traffic, same idea as the weather. X-Plane, you need to spend money on some hefty add-ons for live air traffic. Microsoft Flight Simulator is part of it. Seems to be pretty accurate. It's a couple minutes behind, but that's just how that works. Like if a flight landed here at KMSP at 3:23, it'll show up in the sim at 3:29 or something, but whatever, that's just the nature of it. But it's included and it works and it's awesome. And it even tells you the real types of aircraft and things if you turn that on. So hands down for live traffic for Microsoft Flight Simulator as well, because you don't have to pay for it. ATC, air traffic control. This one's pretty easy. It's no secret that an X-Plane ATC has a lot to be desired. I mean, it works, kind of, sort of. You have to learn how to use it and the nuances specific to X-Plane, but it's there. That's all I have to say about X-Plane's ATC, is that it's there. Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's not too bad. It's way better than it used to be like in the FSX days. It's good, it's usable. You can do a complete flight with it. You can do ground handling with it. So it's not perfect, but it's good and it's there. And you can use your number of keys to respond and search out airports and ATIS and things like that, and the weather and traffic, towered, untowered, all that. So ATC, I mean, not even really much to talk about there. It's definitely a clear winner for Microsoft Flight Simulator for the ATC category. The flight model. X-Plane is known to have a really, really good flight model and is always getting better, but Laminar breaks it for add-on aircraft when they update it. So for example, there was a long time when there were no ground effects and turboprops. You would get sucked into the ground like a black hole. And it's still there, kind of. If you don't expect it in a turboprop and X-Plane, you're going to get sucked down. However, Microsoft Flight Simulator, it caught me off guard. I'm relearning how to fly and land because of ground effects. I am so used to compensating for getting sucked into the ground in X-Plane that I just float an entire runway at idle in Microsoft Flight Simulator because of ground effects. I talked to real-life pilots that have used both simulators, and some of them say X-Plane is realistic, others say X-Plane is a joke. Some have said now that Microsoft Flight Simulator is extremely realistic. Other real-life pilots have said it's a joke. Of course, things you're talking about in a computer program is your sensitivity settings, your calibration settings, which brand of equipment you're using, how old is your equipment, how expensive is your equipment. So it's not that easy to say, really. Again, it's how well do you use your equipment? Do you know how to calibrate it? Do you know how to set the sensitivity levels? Do you know if your equipment is having an issue? And once you know that, then you can talk about flight model. So for most of us, 99% of us, even us serious simmers, the flight model to me is kind of a toss-up. Industry standard says X-Plane, but the hobbyist at home who does not have unlimited resources, and a lot of us don't fly planes in real life, I don't know. I'd say the flight model is kind of equal. So again, how are you going to use the sim? What's your experience, real life versus sim? Do you know how to use your equipment? That one is a toss-up. Application stability is another big one. X-Plane is extremely stable. The only time you have crashes in X-Plane is if you have a bad add-on or a bad plugin. You're not using it right. You've overclocked your computer and then too much and you don't know how to do it, and that's not even part of the sim anyway. So as far as sim stability, X-Plane, completely stable. Microsoft Flight Simulator was rushed. The developers admit that. Their patches are rushed. The developers admit that. Of course, that's because of pressure from the people above them, so it's not their fault, really. If you know how business works, it's not their fault. But there are bugs. Some people say it's just fine. Other people say it's unusable. Microsoft, we're talking about here. My experience is it's just fine. It's okay. I've had crash to desktop only because of the VFR map thing, which may or may not even apply when you watch this. I'm not going to talk about it. But there are issues. in Microsoft Flight Simulator right now. However, my experience is nowhere near what people are whining about on the Facebook groups and stuff in the forums. For me, it's just fine. It's not perfect, but it was just released, and I understand why it was rushed because I know how business works. So for me, it's just fine. X-Plane, though, is much more stable right now. A year from now, who knows? So right now, that point goes to X-Plane, but in a year, that could be outdated. Computer performance. Now, X-Plane is only available on like PC, Mac, or a computer, right? PC, Mac, and Linux. Microsoft Flight Simulator is available on PC as well as Xbox. So I can't talk about the Xbox, but I can talk about the computer part. And with X-Plane 11.5 being in Vulkan now, they seem to be pretty equal for me. When I bought my computer a couple years ago, it was high-end, second from highest end. I don't even know what my specs are because it's so old now, it doesn't even matter, but at the time, it was kind of a big deal. And I can run X-Plane, everything maxed out except the reflection settings because it drives me crazy. And I get about 30 to 50 frames per second in the craziest areas. Microsoft Flight Simulator, everything maxed out except can't remember what setting it is, but except for one near the top. Everything is maxed out. And I'm in that sweet spot around 35 to 40 frames per second. So, and it also depends on internet connection a little bit for Microsoft Flight Simulator because it's streaming your scenery constantly unless it caches it. So X-Plane seems to be a little easier on frame rates and computer equipment. However, you're not getting the visuals, pure visuals that you're getting with Microsoft Flight Simulator. So they're pretty close. Again, it matters to you how you're going to use the sim and how you want to measure it, right? Some people are happy with 20 frames per second. Now, you need 20 frames per second for time to not slow down. But to get that flying feeling, the industry standard is 25 to 35 frames per second, but try to get as close as you can to 35. Anything about 35 frames per second, you're just wasting resources and you could crank something up. Getting below 20, you got to turn stuff down. So, depending on how you use it, I think X-Plane with Vulkan is probably the winner here in terms of performance and demands on your computer. But, it's so negligible, and you do get a lot of pretty eye candy with the Microsoft version that I think I'm going to call this one a toss-up. So to wrap things up here, of all the topics I've covered, what matters most to you? How are you going to use the sim based on the topics I covered and what other people are covering? I honestly cannot say which one is better because I will probably use the sim differently than you. I use the simulator differently than people who watch my videos. I use the simulator different than my friend who's a real-life pilot. Anyone who can conclusively say one sim is better than the other can only speak for themselves. So with that, I know you're looking for an answer. It's a toss-up. X-Plane is geared more towards the very, very serious hobbyist who is going to do a lot of IFR flights, medium to long distances. Microsoft Flight Simulator is geared towards the gamer to the serious simmer as well, but right now it's mostly a GA sim for me. Yes, you can do IFR if you're willing to put up with the quirks and bugs, but as far as using it as a serious simulator, general aviation VFR. So if you're going to do IFR stuff, you want to do instrument flight training, you want to keep current on your instrument stuff, X-Plane, no question. If you want to see what your house looks like, but take it seriously, and you want to just fly around and fly in the mountains and try not to hit mountains and use tiny little runways in a Cessna or a Grand Caravan or something, and still take it very seriously, Microsoft Flight Simulator, for sure. So hopefully this was helpful for you. I enjoyed making the video. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, I know a lot of people are making these videos right now because this is the hot topic in our flight sim community. But everybody has something different to add to the conversation. So this is what I have to say about the conversation. I know people are going to jump to the comments and complain and argue with me, and that's fine, as long as it's not obnoxious and it's actually, you apply some critical thinking skills. That's fine with me. I respond to pretty much everybody. If you are new around here, please like, please subscribe, please share with your friends. Leave a like, leave a comment to play that YouTube algorithm game. If you're new here, which a lot of you probably are, I mostly do A-to-A or door-to-door flights in general aviation. That's a tiny market. Most people do jets. I don't care for jets so much. So general aviation, calm, completely family friendly, not meant for kids, but family friendly, things like that. I respond to my fan base. So if you like that kind of thing, stick around. For those of you who are veterans of the channel, thank you very much for still being here, and I'll see all of you next time.